Arlecchino will be the next weekly boss in Fontaine. Her drip marketing dropped earlier this week, and that was the final piece of evidence that I needed to support this theory. In this video, I will talk about 5 reasons that led me to this conclusion. There will be spoilers of all the Archon quests up to this point, along with some character story quests listed on the screen right now. So consider yourself warned. Now, without further ado, let's get to it. Reason number 1. Fontaine is missing its Fatui weekly boss. Historically, every nation has one weekly boss that is related to the Archon, and another who is or was a Fatui harbinger. One of them would be released during the final act of the nation's Archon quest, and the other during the Archon's second story quest. This, of course, with the exception of Mondstadt, because both weekly bosses there were released at the same time in patch 1.0, which was the release of the game, and we are still missing Venti's second story quest. Mondstadt is an outlier, basically. Now, with Mondstadt removed, if we plot the existing bosses before Fontaine into the quadrant, the ones related to the Archons were released alongside the Archon's second story quest. And when I say related, think of another version of the Archon, one with similar power yet very different outlook on life. Ishdaha, allegedly the Geo-Sovereign, sealed by Rex Lapis for hurting the people of Lijue. Raiden Shogun, created by Raiden A herself, her definition of eternity is no longer what A believes in anymore. And Apep, the Dendro Sovereign herself, the original ruler of Sumeru that is now under Lesser Lord Kusanali's protection. With that definition, it was tricky to put Narwhal under this category because it was not another version of Fusselords. Yes, it strove for destruction, but not necessarily because it wanted to wipe out the Fontainians, more than because it's a monster that would devour anything in sight, and just so happened that the Fontainians got its food running in their veins. This is why I wasn't sure if I should not expect a new boss that is similar in power to Furina in her second story quest. But if we expand on the definition that the boss is related to the Archon in a way that it's a problem that the Archon needs to solve, a problem that endangers the life of the people in the nation, then Narwhal fits the bill. And this leaves us with the Fatui bosses. In other nations, they were released during the final act of the Archon quest because they were the villains of the stories, but not in Fontaine. Something shifted in the way we interact with the Fatui and with the bad guy narrative surrounding them, which I talk about at length in this other video. We actually work together with the Fatui to stop a common enemy, Celestia, and its prophecy/punishment for the people of Fontaine. So it would make sense that we didn't get a Fatui boss in Fontaine Archon quest, which brings us to reason number 2. Timeline-wise, 4.6 will coincide with Furina's second story quest. It is common knowledge that an Archon will have their first banner in the same patch as the final act of their nation's Archon quest. For Zhongli, it was 1.1. For A, it was 2.1, 3.2 for Nahida, and most recently, it was 4.2 for Furina, which, as I have covered, are the same patches when the first weekly bosses in the regions were released. Then, 4 patches later, the Archons would have their first reruns and their second story quest, unlocking the second weekly bosses in the regions. As per writing of this video, one day before 4.5 went live, the pattern above seems likely to continue, because we wouldn't be getting Furina's second story quest in 4.5, nor her first rerun banner. And I suppose I must address this. I didn't consider it plausible for the new weekly boss to be released alongside Neuvillette's second story quest, because as the historical trend suggests, the priority is the Archon. Neuvillette is not the new Archon of Fontaine. In fact, I think it's actually an insult to call him that, when he's literally the reincarnation of the original ruler of Fontaine, and it was a fraction of his original power that created the constitution that is the 7 divine seats of the Archons. Neuvillette is not an Archon. That, and we're getting his rerun in 4.5 and no second story quest was announced. But then you would ask, why is Furina getting a second story quest then? She's no longer the Hydro Archon. Well, I'm glad you asked, because that would bring us to reason number 3. We are getting Furina's second story quest because we're still missing the payoff of Furina's 500 years of sacrifice. This one is something that has been bothering me since the conclusion of the Fontaine Archon quest. In the aftermath of the prophecy, we got to talk to all of the current and future Fontaine playable characters, right, who were involved in the Archon quest, but not with Furina. Let alone talking to her, we didn't even get to see her. She was missing in the aftermath after all that she had endured for the past 500 years, and all that we knew of her reaction, of how she was taking in the whole truth of the plan, of the fact that she had always been an Archon and now her divinity was no more, all of that we got as an exposition from Neuvillette. Even in her first story quest, we barely got anything. Yes, Furina was getting back on her feet and was now pursuing opera again, the one thing that she had always been passionate about, but something was missing. There should have been something in between the final act of Fontaine Archon quest and Furina's first story quest, something that should have brought her some sort of closure. Because remember, in the end, she didn't get to meet Fusselors again. She only met her divinity that one time when she was assigned the role of an Archon 500 years ago, and then nothing. So that's why I believe she needs to get her second story quest. Just like Redden A, who needed her second story quest once she had witnessed the mortal world and how it had shifted her definition of eternity. As someone who suffered in silence, bearing the weight of the sin of her predecessor, I would like to see Furina getting the reward she deserved. Maybe not a closure from her divinity because it was no more, but hey, Egeria is still there. A little good job my little Oceanid from her predecessor wouldn't hurt, right? But then how would this relate to Arlecchino? Well, there are two possibilities that I could think of. First, Arlecchino would show up in Furina's story quest. If Furina's second story quest would revolve around the closure and payoff to Furina's 500 years of sacrifice, given how Arlecchino did attack Furina before in her attempt to steal the Hydronosis, the story quest would be a good opportunity to resolve that. For all we know, Furina is still scared of Arlecchino now. However, as I've covered, Narwhal is the Fontaine weekly boss that is related to the Hydro Archon, and the Fatui is not at odds with Fontaine as a whole, meaning Arlecchino might as well not be related to or involved in Furina's second story quest, because she doesn't have to be. So another possibility here, one that I think is more likely, is Arlecchino showing up in Act 6 of Fontaine Archon quest, aka the missing Dainsleif quest that is not in 4.5. The reason for that is the introduction from the Jester in her drip marketing. Fate grants favors to no one, he said. Only those who would fight it with every ounce of their being may earn the right to challenge it. And isn't that the common theme of every quest we've been with Dainsleif so far? Fate and the people brave enough trying to challenge it. Perhaps we will get more information about the Loom of Fate's operation, or about the Descenders, and something in the storyline would lead us to fight Arlecchino. Or perhaps she will finally ask us a favor in return for helping Fontaine. I mentioned this in my Fatui Alliance theory video, which boils down to me not fully trusting Arlecchino despite her helping hands throughout the crisis in Fontaine. She wanted something in return, and she said so as much. Perhaps the Fatui is starting the next step in their plan to defy Celestia, to challenge fate itself, and she needs our help to achieve it. And last but not least, every playable Fatui Harbingers, former and current members, all need the weekly boss materials from themselves. With Arlecchino playability confirmed in 4.6, it's a dead giveaway to me. Well, that's it from me today. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.